Saint-Mihiel salient, France, 12 September 1918, 0100 to 0500 hours. The American First Army opens its first independent offensive with a deliberately short 4-hour artillery preparation. Pershing's staff has concentrated massed fires and nearly 1,500 Allied aircraft to isolate the battlefield. In the pre-dawn darkness, battery commanders check their watches, line telephones confirm fire plans, French 75mm guns stand ready alongside American pieces. German higher headquarters had repeatedly judged American divisions as inexperienced and operationally unproven. By dawn, trenches will be breached, batteries abandoned, thousands of prisoners taken. The documented contrast is stark. German confidence in early 1918 versus American combined arms method by September. Short, violent barrages, air interdiction, stepwise infantry advances. A Marine Corps study places the bombardment at 4 hours. Air commanders assembled approximately 1,400 to 1,500 aircraft, the largest concentration to that date on the Western Front. Could this method scale again 6 weeks later? The spring of 1918 found the Western Front locked in a familiar stalemate, though German offensives had pushed the Allies back in several sectors. American troops were arriving in France in growing numbers, but European veterans on both sides questioned whether these newcomers could master the intricate choreography of modern warfare. Artillery preparation, infantry assault timing, communications under fire, logistical sustainment, each element required precision, developed over years of brutal trial and error. The Germans, in particular, held to their assessment. Staff reports from early 1918 routinely classified American formations as untried, lacking the institutional knowledge that separated effective divisions from those that would break under sustained pressure. Western Front, France, Cantigny sector, 28 May 1918. A typed attack order sits on an American brigade commander's desk. The document specifies H-hour at 0645, with a 1-hour preparatory fire by French 75mm field guns and trench mortars, all pre-registered on German positions. The target, the village of Cantigny, a modest objective, but one that would test whether American staffs could synchronize combined arms at divisional scale. Major General Robert Lee Bullard commanded the 1st Division, the 1st American division committed to independent offensive action on the Western Front. His staff had worked closely with French artillery officers to develop firing tables, timing sequences, and communications protocols. The attack plan called for rolling barrages, curtains of shell fire that would advance ahead of the infantry at predetermined intervals, smoke to obscure German observation, and immediate consolidation with barbed wire and machine guns once the objective was taken. At the appointed hour, American infantry advanced behind the barrage. Within 90 minutes they had seized Cantigny. Then came the test. German doctrine called for immediate counterattacks to reclaim lost ground before the enemy could consolidate. Over the following 3 days, German forces launched 6 separate counterattacks. All 6 were repelled. On 31 May, German commanders abandoned further efforts to retake the village. The 1st Division Museum records the cost. Over 800 were killed or wounded in the 3-day action. Other official accounts list approximately 1,600 total United States casualties. German prisoners numbered roughly 250. By the arithmetic of attrition, the exchange was costly, but by the standard that mattered, proof of concept, Cantigny was a success. American divisional staffs could plan and execute a limited objective attack with timed fires, hold against counterattacks, and demonstrate operational competence. The method worked. Now it would be scaled. Marne Front, Bourèche, and Belleau Wood. 1 through 26 June 1918. A pair of field glasses sweeps across a wheat field. French artillery batteries mark time on target. All guns will fire simultaneously on the designated coordinates at the designated second. At H-hour on 11 June, Marines of the 2nd Division's 5th Regiment advance into the wood. What followed was not a single assault but a series of brutal, methodical attacks over more than 2 weeks. German positions in Belleau Wood were strong. Interlocking machine gun nests, carefully sighted artillery, communication trenches that allowed rapid reinforcement. The 2nd Division, a mixed force of United States Army and Marine Corps units, attacked repeatedly, each time preceded by French and American preparatory fires, each time driving a little deeper into the wood. German intelligence officers watched with professional interest. Early assessments had discounted American staying power, predicting that heavy casualties would break unit cohesion. But as the June battles unfolded, German reports began to shift. A captured intelligence summary from the 87th German Division, later compiled in post-war records, acknowledged that American casualties were considerable. Estimates ranged from 30 to 40% in some units, yet the attacks continued, and the preparatory fires remained effective. This was not the performance of untried troops who would collapse under pressure. This was evidence of institutional competence. Staffs that could plan complex operations, logistics chains that could sustain them, and soldiers who would execute them despite heavy losses. Marine Corps historical briefs note that the 11 June Wheatfield assault proved decisive in breaking into the wood proper, but the fighting continued until 26 June before the position was fully secured. The cost was severe. Casualty figures for the 2nd Division during the entire Château-Thierry operation exceeded 9,000. But the operational effect extended beyond the tactical objective. German files, compiled and translated in post-war years, show revised assessments of American attack capability when paired with dense, timed fires. What had been dismissed in April was being documented with professional respect by late June. With the Marne line stabilized, the American Expeditionary Forces was authorized to form its first army. More significantly, it was authorized to plan its own offensive operations. The transition from division-scale attacks under Allied command to army-scale operations under American command would require not just courage, but logistics, staff work, and industrial support on a scale that skeptics doubted the United States could achieve in the available time. They would be proven wrong by autumn. American Expeditionary Forces General Headquarters, Chaumont, July through August 1918. A wallboard displays movement tables for ammunition trains, road repair priorities, and air reconnaissance schedules. Staff officers annotate maps showing supply dumps, artillery parks, and forward assembly areas. General John Joseph Pershing studies the plans for forming an independent American army capable of sustained offensive operations. The organizational challenge was immense. An effective offensive required more than brave infantry. It required artillery in sufficient numbers and with adequate ammunition stocks. It required engineers to maintain roads under constant traffic and shell fire. It required medical services to evacuate casualties and return recovered soldiers to their units. It required signal troops to maintain communications across a fluid battlefield. It required aviation to provide reconnaissance, artillery spotting, and air superiority. And it required a staff system capable of coordinating all these elements across multiple corps and dozens of divisions. Critics argued that the American Expeditionary Forces lacked the institutional experience to manage such complexity. Building an effective army required more than enthusiasm. It required years of doctrinal development, staff training, and operational experience. The British and French had paid for their expertise with hundreds of thousands of casualties over 4 years of war. How could the Americans compress that learning into months? The answer lay in industrial capacity and organizational discipline. The services of supply, the logistics arm of the American Expeditionary Forces, established ammunition dumps at key points behind the front. Engineer units worked around the clock to improve roads and maintain bridges. Artillery officers developed standardized firing tables that specified shell allotments per yard of front for different tactical situations. Counter-battery groups trained to identify and neutralize German artillery through sound ranging and flash spotting. Contact patrol aircraft practiced coordination with ground forces to adjust fires in real time. By early September, the American Expeditionary Forces fielded 1st, 4th, and 5th Corps, with French artillery and aviation units attached to augment American capabilities. Pre-staged dumps held sufficient ammunition to support short, violent preparatory bombardments, hurricane fires, in the terminology of the period. Without the multi-day bombardments that had characterized earlier offensives and gave the enemy time to reinforce threatened sectors, the United States Army Center of Military History summarizes the human cost of this organizational achievement: more than 255,000 casualties, including 52,997 battle deaths in roughly 6 months of combat. These figures would make the American Expeditionary Forces 1918 campaign one of the bloodiest in United States military history. But in the summer of 1918, those costs still lay ahead. What mattered in August was that the organizational structure existed to make 4-hour preparatory bombardments operationally feasible. Saint-Mihiel would be the first test of the American Expeditionary Forces' independent planning and execution. Wavre-Plain, 12 September 1918, 0100 to 0500 hours. Battery commanders synchronize their watches. Counter-battery tables list German artillery positions identified through weeks of reconnaissance and sound ranging. Code sheets specify the timing for barrage lifts, when the curtain of shell fire will advance forward, and how quickly, so that infantry can follow closely behind without walking into their own fire. German commands anticipated a long Allied preparatory bombardment. Traditional doctrine called for multi-day artillery preparations to cut barbed wire, destroy trench systems, and neutralize defensive positions. But long bombardments had a fatal weakness. They announced the location of the coming attack, allowed defenders to bring up reserves, and, critically, turned roads into impassable mud, complicating the movement of supplies and reinforcements once the infantry assault began. Pershing's staff chose a different method. The preparatory bombardment for Saint-Mihiel would last no longer than 4 hours. To achieve sufficient destructive effect in that compressed time frame, artillery density would be increased dramatically. In some sectors, American divisions received double or even triple their standard artillery allotment. French artillery units reinforced American guns. Counter-battery fire would begin immediately, seeking to neutralize German artillery before it could respond effectively. Wire-cutting fires would focus on known obstacles. Gas shells would target command posts and communication nodes. At 0100 hours, the bombardment began. 1st, 4th, and 5th Corps attacked on converging axes. Toward the apex of the Saint-Mihiel salient, French 2nd Colonial Corps attacked from the southern face. The objective, to pinch off the salient and eliminate a German-held bulge that had existed since 1914. The short preparatory fire achieved its intended effects. German forward trenches were breached quickly, communications were disrupted. German artillery response was slower and less coordinated than in sectors where defenders had days to prepare. American infantry advanced behind rolling barrages, supported by French Renault FT light tanks and heavier Schneider and Saint-Chamond models. A historical division brief from the Marine Corps University notes the 4-hour artillery preparation as a defining characteristic of the operation. The compressed time frame preserved surprise, limited damage to roads needed for resupply, and demonstrated that massed fires could substitute for prolonged bombardments if sufficient guns and ammunition were available. By the end of the first day, American forces had penetrated deep into the salient. Prisoner tallies ran into the thousands, captured gun counts rose steadily as German artillery positions were overrun before they could be withdrawn. The method, short preparation, massed fires, rapid advance, had worked at army scale. Within 4 days, the Saint-Mihiel salient was eliminated. The cost was significant, but not catastrophic by Western Front standards. More importantly, the operation proved that American staffs could plan and execute complex offensive operations independently, integrating artillery, infantry, armor, and air power into a coordinated combined arms assault. The question now was whether the model could be applied again, at even larger scale, against a more heavily defended sector. The answer would come in less than 2 weeks. Aerodromes around Saint-Mihiel, 12 through 15 September 1918. Operations boards list the day's sorties by type: pursuit, observation, bombardment, mechanics fuel SPAD fighters, and de Havilland DH-4 light bombers. Squadron commanders brief pilots on their assigned sectors, target priorities, and recognition signals to prevent friendly fire incidents. German air forces had not faced a single coordinated armada of approximately 1,400 to 1,500 aircraft operating over a confined sector. The concentration assembled for Saint-Mihiel represented an unprecedented massing of air power under unified command. Brigadier General William "Billy" Mitchell commanded the air operation. Under his direction, 26 American, 61 French, and 3 Italian squadrons were organized by function. Pursuit squadrons would establish air superiority, denying German reconnaissance aircraft the ability to observe American movements and provide targeting data to German artillery. Bombardment squadrons, flying day and night missions, would strike rail nodes, supply dumps, and communication centers to isolate the battlefield. Observation squadrons would conduct artillery spotting, using wireless telegraphy to transmit corrections to gun batteries. Contact patrols would track the forward progress of infantry and relay that information to higher headquarters. The United States Air Force Museum lists 1,481 airplanes under Mitchell's command for the Saint-Mihiel operation, with detailed squadron counts by nationality and aircraft type. Air and Space Forces magazine notes that approximately 1,100 to 1,200 of these aircraft were mission-capable at any given time, accounting for maintenance, weather, and battle damage. Modern United States Air Force Academy studies confirm that most reputable accounts use the 1,481 figure and discuss its status as the largest air armada assembled to that date in the war. The operational effects were immediate and significant. German air reconnaissance was suppressed, limiting the enemy's ability to detect American troop movements or identify artillery positions. Rail interdiction disrupted German supply lines and delayed the movement of reinforcements. Artillery spotting improved American counter-battery effectiveness. Contact patrols provided timely information on the progress of the ground assault, allowing commanders to commit reserves at decisive points. The air concentration at Saint-Mihiel demonstrated that industrial capacity could be translated into operational advantage. The United States and France together could field more aircraft, train more pilots, and sustain higher sortie rates than Germany could match in a single sector. When that advantage was concentrated under unified command and synchronized with ground operations, the effects multiplied. Within 1 week of the Saint-Mihiel operation's conclusion, aviation assets began shifting south to the Meuse-Argonne sector. The model, massing air power to isolate the battlefield and amplify artillery effects, would be applied again at even larger scale. If Saint-Mihiel demonstrated feasibility, Meuse-Argonne would test whether the method could be sustained over a prolonged campaign. The answer would shape the final months of the war. Saint-Mihiel and Meuse-Argonne sectors, September through October 1918. A tank company log records bogging incidents, fuel allocations per march, and crew rotation schedules. The reality of armored warfare in 1918 diverged sharply from the expectations that had driven tank development earlier in the war. Heavy tanks had been conceived as breakthrough weapons, armored behemoths that would crush barbed wire, cross trenches, and provide mobile fire support for infantry assaulting fortified positions. The reality proved more complex. The French Saint-Chamond heavy tank, mounting a 75mm gun in a forward casemate, suffered from a critical design flaw. Its hull overhang prevented it from crossing wide trenches. In the shell-torn terrain of the Western Front, Saint-Chamond tanks frequently bogged down or became immobilized. Technical assessments compiled after the war are blunt. One digest notes that the Saint-Chamond would never meet, let alone exceed, many of its intended purposes. The combination of poor cross-country mobility, mechanical unreliability, and vulnerability to artillery fire limited its tactical utility. The French Renault FT light tank proved more successful. Weighing approximately 6.5 metric tons with a two-man crew, the Renault FT mounted either a 37mm SA-18 cannon or a machine gun in a rotating turret, a revolutionary design feature that became standard in later tank development. Its compact size and lower ground pressure gave it better mobility in difficult terrain. Maximum speed was approximately 7 km per hour, walking pace for accompanying infantry. At Saint-Mihiel, the United States Tank Corps, commanded by Colonel George Smith Patton during the initial assault, deployed Renault FT tanks in support of infantry. The tanks proved valuable for reducing local strongpoints, machine gun nests, observation posts, and small fortifications that might delay an infantry advance. When tank, artillery, and infantry were properly coordinated, the combination was effective, but tanks were not decisive. Artillery density remained the critical factor. A tank company might support a battalion attack. Massed artillery fires shaped the entire corps sector. Tanks contributed locally, artillery dominated operationally. This recognition shaped American doctrine for the Meuse-Argonne offensive. First Army retained tanks for localized breakthrough operations, but did not plan deep exploitation missions. Tank units would support infantry assaults against specific strongpoints, not range ahead of the main force. This represented a doctrinal correction based on combat experience. Tanks in 1918 were supporting weapons, not independent arm capable of strategic maneuver. The hard-won lesson would influence American armor development in the interwar years. But in October 1918, the immediate priority was clear. Concentrate artillery, coordinate infantry, use tanks where terrain and tactical situation allowed, and sustain the offensive through superior logistics. Industrial capacity and organizational discipline, not technological silver bullets, would determine the outcome. First Army ammunition trains and services of supply, September 1918. Rail sidings are stacked with wooden pallets of artillery shells, each pallet marked with caliber, shell type, and lot number. Tables specify rounds per gun per hour for different fire missions: counter-battery, wire cutting, harassment, preparatory bombardment. Road maintenance detachments work through the night patching craters and reinforcing bridges to ensure continuous traffic flow. Critics had doubted the American Expeditionary Force's capacity to sustain high-rate artillery fires. British and French experience suggested that intensive bombardments required extensive preparation, building ammunition dumps close to the front, improving roads to handle the increased traffic, and establishing repair facilities to maintain guns subjected to unprecedented rates of fire. The American solution combined industrial capacity with organizational planning. The services of supply, often overlooked in accounts that focus on combat units, performed the unglamorous but essential work of modern warfare. Supply units operated rail lines behind the front, moving ammunition from ports to forward dumps. Engineer units improved roads, knowing that a single washed-out bridge could paralyze an entire corps. Ordnance units maintained artillery pieces, replacing worn barrels and damaged recoil mechanisms to keep guns in action. Pre-positioned dumps held sufficient ammunition to support short, dense barrages across corps-level frontages. Counter-battery ammunition was allocated separately, recognizing that neutralizing German artillery was a prerequisite for successful infantry assaults. Weather forecasts informed planning. Rain and mud favored short bombardments that could be completed before road conditions deteriorated. The United States Army Center of Military History's Saint-Mihiel campaign pamphlet outlines the logistics staging required to enable a dramatic action against the salient. The details are prosaic: tonnage moved per day, shell stocks per battery, maintenance schedules. But the operational implications were profound. Reliable logistics enabled short preparatory fires without sacrificing destructive effect. Hurricane bombardments became operationally feasible because the industrial and organizational capacity existed to deliver them. This capability was not improvised. It was the result of months of staff work, calculating shell requirements, improving transportation infrastructure, training supply personnel, and establishing standardized procedures that could be replicated across multiple corps. The fact that such preparations occurred behind the lines, away from the drama of combat, did not diminish their importance. Every shell that landed on German positions, every barrage that suppressed enemy artillery, every rolling lift that cleared the way for infantry, all depended on the unglamorous work of logistics. By late September, preparations shifted from Saint-Mihiel to Meuse-Argonne. Ammunition trains were rerouted, dumps were repositioned, roads were improved in new sectors. The same logistics system that had supported a 4-day operation at Saint-Mihiel would now sustain a 47-day campaign in more difficult terrain against stronger defenses. The method remained constant: concentrate fires, compress preparation time, sustain operations through superior logistics. If the method held, German defenses would break. If logistics failed, the offensive would stall. Everything now depended on execution at scale. German positions opposite First Army, September 1918. An American intelligence officer studies translated excerpts from captured German documents. The reports provide a window into German assessments of American combat capability, assessments that had evolved significantly since spring. Early 1918, German staff estimates often underestimated American tactical skill. Reports characterized United States formations as inexperienced, with weak staff work and inadequate fire discipline. This was not mere propaganda. It reflected genuine uncertainty about how quickly American forces could master the complex choreography of Western Front warfare. The fighting at Cantigny, Belleau Wood, and Saint-Mihiel forced revisions. German intelligence summaries from June through September show increasingly professional assessments. American preparatory fires were acknowledged as effective. Infantry assaults were described as persistent despite heavy casualties. Coordination between arms, artillery, infantry, and aviation was noted as improving rapidly. More tellingly, German reports documented operational effects. Prisoner tallies from Saint-Mihiel indicated that American forces had achieved surprise, despite the obvious concentration of forces. Captured gun counts suggested that German artillery had been disrupted before it could respond effectively. After-action reports noted rapid withdrawals under American fire planning and air interdiction, the hallmarks of an army losing operational cohesion. These assessments filtered up to higher commands. Army Group Gallwitz, responsible for sectors opposite the American First Army, adjusted defensive plans based on accumulating evidence. German doctrine still emphasized immediate counterattacks to reclaim lost ground, but the effectiveness of American artillery made such counterattacks increasingly costly. Where German units had once expected to maul inexperienced American divisions, they now faced opponents capable of executing complex operations with professional competence. The United States Army Center of Military History's Meuse-Argonne pamphlet summarizes the operational outcome. The Americans gradually ground down the German units opposing them. This grinding down was not the result of any single brilliant maneuver. It was the cumulative effect of sustained pressure, repeated attacks preceded by intense bombardments, continuous air interdiction that disrupted German logistics, and organizational resilience that allowed American forces to absorb casualties and maintain offensive operations. For German commanders, this presented an insoluble problem. They could not match American material superiority. German artillery was outnumbered. German air forces were stretched thin across multiple fronts. German logistics were strained by years of blockade and the demands of fighting on multiple fronts. What had been dismissed in spring, American industrial capacity, translating into operational advantage, was now undeniable reality in autumn. By late September, German intelligence assessed that the American First Army would launch a major offensive in the Meuse-Argonne sector. The assessment was correct. What German commands could not know was the scale. More than 1.2 million American soldiers would be committed over 47 days in the single deadliest campaign in United States military history. The operational shock at Saint-Mihiel had shaped German expectations. The sustained pressure in Meuse-Argonne would exceed them. Argonne Forest and Meuse Heights, 26 September 1918. An operations overlay shows the Kriemhilde Stellung, the fortified line that anchored German defenses in depth. Ravines, ridges, and dense forest canopy create a defender's paradise. Machine gun positions are sited to provide interlocking fields of fire. Communication trenches connect strong points. Artillery observation posts on the heights can call fires on any movement in the valleys below. Allied leaders anticipated steady progress when the Meuse-Argonne offensive began. American formations had proven their competence at Saint-Mihiel. Artillery preparation would be intense. Air power would isolate the battlefield. What could go wrong? Everything and nothing. The offensive began on schedule. Artillery fires were effective. Air operations proceeded as planned, but terrain and German depth defenses slowed the advance. Initial penetrations were measured in hundreds of yards, not miles. Casualties mounted quickly. By the end of the first week, it was clear that Meuse-Argonne would not be another Saint-Mihiel. This would be a grinding, attritional campaign requiring sustained effort over weeks, not days. First Army deployed 3 corps, 1st, 3rd, and 5th, with French Fourth Army attacking on the left. Artillery densities increased as more batteries were brought forward. Tank employment was constrained by terrain. The Argonne Forest's ravines and the Meuse Heights slopes were poor tank country. Contact patrols worked to maintain coordination between infantry and supporting fires, but communications remained difficult in the broken terrain. The United States Army Center of Military History documents the human cost. 26,277 killed and 95,786 wounded over 47 days. These figures make Meuse-Argonne the deadliest campaign in United States military history, exceeding the casualties of any single operation in the Civil War, World War II, Korea, or Vietnam. Why such high casualties? The combination of difficult terrain, determined German defense, and American determination to maintain offensive pressure created a brutal arithmetic. German machine gun positions in ravines and on slopes were difficult to suppress with artillery. Infantry assaults up hillsides presented German gunners with clear fields of fire. Each strongpoint required methodical reduction, artillery preparation, infantry assault, consolidation, then advance to the next objective. American commanders adjusted tactics based on early friction. Artillery-infantry coordination was tightened. Preparatory bombardments were refined to focus on known strongpoints rather than broad-area fires. Contact patrols became more sophisticated, using flares and wireless telegraphy to provide real-time information. The operational learning curve was steep and paid for in casualties, but the adjustments were effective. By mid-October, the offensive had evolved into a systematic reduction of German defenses. No longer was there any expectation of rapid breakthrough. The objective became attrition: inflict unsustainable casualties on German defenders, disrupt their logistics through air interdiction, and maintain constant pressure that prevented the enemy from stabilizing the front. German commanders faced impossible choices: withdraw and cede territory, or stand and accept steady losses to superior American firepower. Either choice served American strategic objectives. Withdrawal opened the way toward vital rail lines. Attrition depleted German reserves needed on other fronts. The method was brutal, costly, and effective. It was also about to intensify. First Army Front, October through 1 November 1918. A fire plan specifies a 2-hour hurricane barrage preceding a general attack across the entire Army frontage. Code sheets list the sequence: counter-battery fires first, targeting known German artillery positions; wire-cutting fires second, against obstacles identified through aerial reconnaissance; area bombardment third, saturating defensive positions with high explosive and gas shells; rolling barrage fourth, advancing ahead of the infantry at predetermined rates. German machine gun lattices had stalled earlier phases of the offensive. The combination of terrain, prepared positions, and interlocking fields of fire made frontal assaults prohibitively costly without effective suppression. The solution was fire density. Concentrate enough artillery on narrow frontages to overwhelm German defensive capabilities. First Army artillery staffs coordinated the massing of more than 2,000 guns. Some modern compiled counts list approximately 2,700 pieces, though such figures aggregate different sources and should be noted as compiled rather than primary documentary totals. Regardless of the precise count, the concentration was unprecedented in American military experience. Gun batteries were positioned hub to hub in some sectors. Ammunition stocks were built to sustain 2 hours of maximum rate fire. Air observation adjusted fires in real time. Spotter aircraft circled over German positions, using wireless telegraphy to transmit corrections. Add 50 meters, right 100 meters, fire for effect. The coordination between air and artillery had improved dramatically. Since September, what had been experimental in the early days of the offensive was now routine procedure. The 1 November hurricane barrage achieved its intended effect. German communication networks were severed, artillery positions were neutralized before they could respond effectively, machine gun nests were buried or suppressed. When American infantry advanced behind the rolling barrage, resistance was disorganized and local rather than coordinated and systematic. The United States Army Center of Military History's Meuse-Argonne narrative details the 1 November fire plan and its operational effects in the final drive. The compressed time frame, 2 hours, represented the culmination of lessons learned since Cantigny in May. Short, violent preparatory fires could achieve effects that previously required days of bombardment, provided sufficient guns and ammunition were available, and coordination between arms was tight. Fire density restored momentum across the First Army front. Daily advances increased from hundreds of yards to kilometers, prisoner tallies rose, captured gun counts climbed. German units that had held their positions for weeks withdrew in stages, attempting to establish new defensive lines farther east. But the arithmetic of attrition was unforgiving. Each withdrawal cost equipment that could not be replaced. Each defensive stand cost casualties Germany could not afford. The industrial and manpower reserves that allowed the United States to sustain a 47-day offensive simply did not exist on the German side. Where American artillery fired hurricane barrages, German artillery rationed shells. Where American divisions rotated into and out of the line, maintaining offensive pressure, German divisions stayed in place until rendered ineffective. By early November, situation reports showed enemy artillery rates of fire declining. Rail interdiction missions reported German supply trains running less frequently. Prisoner interrogations revealed low morale and supply shortages. The cumulative effects of sustained American pressure were approaching a breaking point. The question was no longer whether German defenses would collapse, but when. Meuse-Argonne Sector, 1 through 9 November 1918. Daily situation summaries show stepwise gains. Villages captured, ridge lines secured, road networks interdicted. German artillery response rates continue declining. Rail nodes remain under bombardment, limiting the enemy's ability to move supplies or reinforcements. German commanders expected to hold the Meuse heights through winter. The terrain favored defense. Positions were well prepared, reserves could be shuttled by rail to threatened sectors. What they had not anticipated was the sustained intensity of American operations, where previous offensives on the Western Front had culminated after days or weeks. The Meuse-Argonne offensive showed no signs of culmination after 6 weeks. The reason was logistics, American. Supply lines stretched back through improved roads and rail networks to ports where ships from the United States continued delivering ammunition, equipment, and replacement personnel. The services of supply maintained this pipeline despite the inevitable friction of moving vast quantities of material through war-torn countryside. Engineer units repaired roads faster than German artillery could crater them. Medical services evacuated casualties and returned recovered soldiers to their units. Replacement depots filled gaps in frontline formations. German supply lines, by contrast, were stretched thin and subject to constant air interdiction. Day bombardment missions struck rail yards and supply dumps. Night harassment fires disrupted movement. The cumulative effect was a logistics system operating at the edge of collapse. American divisions advancing toward Buzancy and Sedan encountered decreasing resistance. Where German units stood to fight, rolling lifts and contact patrols enabled American infantry to call for artillery support in near real time. Where German units withdrew, air reconnaissance tracked their movements and directed pursuit forces. The coordination between arms, artillery, infantry, aviation that had been experimental in May was now systematic in November. The United States Army Center of Military History summarizes the operational outcome. The Americans gradually ground down German formations across the 47-day offensive. This grinding down was not dramatic. There was no single decisive battle, no brilliant maneuver that shattered enemy cohesion. Instead, it was the accumulated pressure of artillery air logistics advantage applied relentlessly over 7 weeks. Army Group Gallwitz, responsible for the sector opposite First Army, reported mounting difficulties in late October and early November. Units were under strength, artillery ammunition was rationed, morale was declining. replacement flows could not keep pace with losses. The strategic situation on other fronts, British advances in Flanders, French gains farther west, meant that reserves could not be spared to stabilize the American sector. By 9 November, German defensive positions in the Meuse-Argonne were collapsing in places and withdrawing in others. Prisoner tallies for the first 9 days of November exceeded all previous weeks. Captured gun counts indicated that German artillery units were abandoning equipment rather than attempting to withdraw it under American fire. On 11 November, the armistice took effect. First Army tallied its costs: 26,277 killed, 95,786 wounded in 47 days, the deadliest campaign in United States history. The scale was unprecedented. The outcome, helping to force German acceptance of armistice terms, was significant. The method, short preparatory fires, massed artillery, air interdiction, sustained logistics, had proven decisive. Not through a single blow, but through accumulated pressure that exhausted German defensive capabilities. Numbers, organization, and industrial capacity had closed the argument. Chaumont and Washington, November through December 1918, post-action reports phase. Staff officers compile summation tables, total casualties by type, prisoners captured, guns seized, ammunition expended, miles advanced. The numbers tell a story of scale and cost unprecedented in American military experience. The pre-war United States Army numbered approximately 100,000 soldiers, most stationed in the continental United States or overseas garrisons. Within 18 months, the American Expeditionary Forces had grown to more than 2 million personnel in France, organized into divisions, corps, and armies capable of executing operations at European scale alongside Allied partners. This expansion was not merely numerical. It required developing staff systems, logistics networks, training programs, and doctrinal frameworks that could translate strategic objectives into tactical actions. Officers who had never commanded more than a company found themselves leading divisions. Staff officers who had worked on peacetime planning found themselves coordinating multi-corps offensives involving hundreds of thousands of soldiers, thousands of artillery pieces, and hundreds of aircraft. The organizational achievement was remarkable. The human cost was severe. The United States Army Center of Military History's overview is stark. More than 255,000 casualties, including 52,997 battle deaths in roughly 6 months of combat. These figures exceed American casualties in the entire Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, or the Mexican War. They approach the scale of major Civil War campaigns. Within that total, Meuse-Argonne stands out: 26,277 killed and 95,786 wounded in 47 days. The daily casualty rate exceeded 2,500. For comparison, the bloodiest single day of the Civil War, Antietam, 17 September 1862, saw approximately 3,600 Union casualties killed and wounded. Meuse-Argonne sustained nearly that rate daily for 7 weeks. Why such costs? The combination of determined German defense, difficult terrain, and American strategic determination to maintain pressure regardless of losses created a brutal arithmetic. Each yard gained required artillery preparation and infantry assault. Each strongpoint reduced cost casualties. The operational tempo, attacking continuously rather than pausing to consolidate, kept pressure on German defenses but also kept American units in contact, taking losses. Yet the method succeeded. Saint-Mihiel eliminated a 4-year-old salient in 4 days, demonstrating that American staffs could plan and execute Army-scale offensive operations. Meuse-Argonne applied sustained pressure that, combined with Allied offensives on other fronts, fed into the German decision to accept armistice terms on 11 November. Post-war analyses pointed to method and mass, not luck or opponent weakness, as the decisive factors. The Germans had not suddenly forgotten how to fight. Their defensive positions were well prepared. Their tactical doctrine remained sound. What they lacked was the industrial capacity to match American material superiority and the manpower reserves to sustain prolonged attrition. American success rested on organization, firepower, and sustainment. Short, intense preparatory bombardments, enabled by massed artillery and reliable logistics, could achieve effects that previously required days of shelling. Air concentration isolated battlefields and amplified artillery effects. Systematic staff work coordinated complex operations across corps and army frontages. Industrial production supplied the shells, weapons, and equipment required to sustain high-tempo operations. The contrast with spring 1918 was complete. Where German officers had dismissed American capabilities in April, German intelligence files by November documented effective combined arms operations that steadily eroded defensive positions. Where skeptics had doubted American logistics in July, the reality by December was a supply system that had sustained a 47-day offensive in difficult terrain. The numbers closed the argument. The method proved the point. Industrial democracy, when mobilized for war, could generate and sustain military power at a scale that Germany could not match. Meuse-Argonne Front and National Archives, 1919 through 1920, documentation phase. A Clark stamps received on a post-war narrative report summarizing prisoners captured, guns seized, and sector advances by week. These documents, compiled from unit after-action reports and staff summaries, provide the raw material for historical assessment. German mockery of American offensives in early 1918 had given way by autumn to documented attrition under massed artillery and air isolation. The transition was recorded in real time, captured German intelligence summaries, prisoner interrogations, and post-war compilations of enemy assessments. What emerges is a pattern of evolving respect mixed with operational frustration. Early German reports characterized American attacks as poorly coordinated and vulnerable to counterattack. By June, reports acknowledged the effectiveness of American preparatory fires when properly executed. By September, German intelligence noted that American operations at Saint-Mihiel demonstrated professional staff work and combined arms coordination. By November, German commanders reported being unable to stabilize defensive lines under sustained American pressure. Pershing's First Army, French artillery and aviation reinforcements, and Allied air commands had demonstrated a model of offensive warfare adapted to 1918 conditions. Short, violent bombardments that preserved surprise and trafficability. Air dominance at decisive points to isolate the battlefield, ammunition trains enabling repeatable hurricane fires, and organizational resilience to sustain operations over weeks rather than days. The system, planning, production, and coordination proved decisive. No single technology or tactic won the campaign. Artillery was critical, but artillery alone could not take ground. Infantry had to assault and hold. Air power was valuable, but aircraft could not force German withdrawals without ground pressure. Tanks contributed locally, but remained supporting weapons rather than decisive arms. Logistics enabled everything, but fought no battles directly. The integration of these elements, combined arms in modern terminology, made the difference. And that integration required staff systems, communications networks, doctrine, and training that could only be developed through institutional effort over time. The American Expeditionary Forces compressed that development into months through a combination of Allied advice, combat experience, and organizational discipline. The United States Army Center of Military History's Meuse-Argonne pamphlet concludes, the Americans persevered and gradually ground down the German units opposing them. Perseverance and grinding down are unglamorous terms, lacking the drama of breakthrough or encirclement, but they accurately describe what happened. American forces attacked repeatedly, accepted heavy casualties, adjusted tactics based on experience, and maintained offensive pressure until German defenses collapsed. The casualties, 26,277 killed in Meuse-Argonne alone, more than 255,000 total casualties, including 52,997 battle deaths in roughly 6 months of American Expeditionary Forces combat, represent individual tragedies multiplied across hundreds of thousands of families. Each number was a person, a farmer from Iowa, a factory worker from Pennsylvania, an immigrant from New York, a school teacher from Texas. They came from every state and background, trained in hastily expanded camps, crossed an ocean under threat of submarine attack, and fought in a war most had barely heard of 2 years earlier. Their contribution was not singular heroism, though individual acts of courage were common, but collective effectiveness. They performed the unglamorous work of industrial warfare, maintained supply lines, executed fire plans, advanced under machine gun fire, held ground against counterattacks, and returned to the assault the next day. Numbers ended the argument. 26,277 Americans killed in 47 days, 255,000 casualties in 6 months, an output only industrial scale. Logistics and disciplined fire planning could sustain, and only a democracy mobilized for total war could generate. The pattern demonstrated across 7 months was clear and repeatable. Cantigny, in May, validated that American divisional staffs could execute timed assaults with synchronized artillery support. Belleau Wood, in June, forced German intelligence to revise assessments of American combat effectiveness. Saint-Mihiel, in September, proved that 4-hour preparatory bombardments combined with air concentration could achieve operational surprise at army scale. Meuse-Argonne from late September through early November applied hurricane barrages and sustained logistics over 47 days of continuous operations. The documented outcome speaks for itself. The deadliest campaign in United States military history, 26,277 killed, 95,786 wounded, within total American Expeditionary Forces casualties exceeding 255,000, including 52,997 battle deaths in approximately 6 months of combat. The human cost was staggering. The operational momentum contributed materially to the 11 November armistice. The historically significant conclusion rests on archival fragments that anchor the narrative in documented fact. The United States Army Center of Military History's Saint-Mihiel campaign pamphlet states, "Reducing the Saint-Mihiel salient was a natural choice for employing the First Army in a dramatic and decisive action." The Meuse-Argonne pamphlet concludes that the Americans persevered and gradually ground down the German units opposing them. These measured assessments, compiled from unit reports and operational records, lack drama but convey essential truth. What changed between May and November 1918 was not German capability. Their tactical doctrine remained sound, their defensive positions well prepared, but American capacity. Industrial production supplied shells in quantities that enabled short, intense bombardments. Organizational discipline coordinated artillery, infantry, aviation, and logistics across army-scale frontages. Staff systems compressed operational learning that had taken other armies years to develop into months of accelerated experience. The method succeeded because it rested on advantages Germany could not match: industrial capacity to produce ammunition and equipment at scale, manpower reserves to sustain attrition, logistics networks to maintain supply lines across extended operations, and organizational resilience to absorb casualties, learn from mistakes, and continue attacking. German officers who laughed at American inexperience in spring found their trenches subjected to hurricane fires by autumn, not through any failure of German arms, but through material superiority that translated directly into operational advantage. The arithmetic was brutal and simple: more guns, more shells, more aircraft, more soldiers, sustained over more days, across more frontage, with better logistics than the enemy could counter. This was industrial warfare at its essence. Victory went not to the side with superior courage or tactical brilliance, both sides demonstrated those qualities, but to the side that could generate, deploy, and sustain greater material resources over time. The American Expeditionary Forces in 1918 proved that a democracy, when mobilized for total war, could achieve that superiority within months rather than years. The cost in human terms, more than 250,000 casualties in 6 months, stands as permanent testament to the price of that achievement. Every shell fired, every yard gained, every position held represented individual soldiers performing their duty under fire. The statistics that convey operational success, prisoners captured, guns seized, ground gained, were purchased with blood. The final accounting shows stark clarity. Short preparatory fires worked when supported by massed artillery and reliable logistics. Air concentration multiplied ground effects when properly coordinated. Sustained offensives required industrial capacity and organizational discipline more than tactical innovation. These were the lessons written in the casualty lists of Cantigny, Belleau Wood, Saint-Mihiel, and Meuse-Argonne. The Germans laughed in spring. Their trenches broke under fire in autumn. The transition between those conditions was documented in real time, recorded in unit reports, and compiled in post-war archives. The evidence is clear, the conclusions unambiguous, the human cost permanently recorded. 26,277 Americans died in 47 days at Meuse-Argonne. They died proving that industrial democracy, organized for war, could prevail against military autocracy. The price was terrible. The outcome was decisive. The memory remains.